I want to touch on a parliamentary press release that came out last year, and it highlighted a key issue, which is that as a country, we don't have a defined principle for what a startup is. And so, how can we build a startup ecosystem where the government doesn't have a definition of what a startup is? And with that, what's the Startup Act's proposal of what a startup is and what qualifies a startup as a startup?
Yeah, that's a great point. And it comes back to my earlier point, really. Does the government understand what we're talking about when we talk about a startup? So the Startup Act obviously has its definition, which is proposed to the legislature. And they've actually, since that press release, they've certainly tentatively bought into it because this is the base upon which we're forming our discussions with them, saying if we can, for example, have special laws that relate to certain companies, how do we define those companies and then differentiate them for application of these new laws that we're suggesting apply? So we have a definition of a tech growth company. We talk about startups, but sometimes people think startups are companies that have been going for a few months. There are a lot of very, very successful companies out there that regard themselves as startups. I think something like the majority of the NASDAQ, the listed exchange in the US, were originally tech startups, and they provide most of the value there. Anyway, so the first thing is we've educated the government as to the people we're engaging with there, what we mean by a startup. And usually that's going to be a fairly young company. Let's say it's under 5 years old. And its business is predominantly a highly scalable, tech-enabled product or service. And those are the key issues there. It's got to be really focused on research and development, and it doesn't really distribute its profits to shareholders, and that's quite an important point. So that means that when most companies, once they make money, at a certain point they've covered the foreseeable costs of doing business for the next 6 to 12 months. And if there's extra cash, you pay it out to the shareholders. And the shareholders get a bit of dividends and return the investment. That doesn't happen with a startup, ever. Because all the money in the startup is intended by the company, by the directors, and by the shareholders to be reinvested in the company and to grow opportunities. So if we can build that, there are also international definitions of startups in the OECD guidelines, Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, which is the international kind of like tax code. It talks about the information, communications, and technology sector. So we've drawn those principles of fairly young, very much software and innovation focused and research and development and continually growing, not returning cash to its shareholders. And then on top of that, we said, tell you what, our industry, the SA Startup Act, is